know Pastor Dwayne likes to keep this right in front of him. I can't do that. I like to move around a little bit too much. So the title of my message this morning is Above All, Love. Okay? Above all, love. And it seems like such a simple, easy message. At the sound of it, at the base of it, at its words, just love. It seems like that would be very, very easy. And in reality, it probably should be. This concept of love is something that we do every day of our lives. But it's a simple message with a very hard application to life. It's a simple message, but a hard application. And so I heard about a conversation a few months ago. I was not privy to the conversation. It was somebody that was involved in the conversation shared it with me after the fact. And everybody involved in the conversation, I want to make sure I state this very clearly. Everybody involved in the conversation, they were all Christians. They all professed faith in God and in Christ and were believers. But in the midst of this conversation, they were talking about life and they're talking about faith and about the Bible. And the conversation kind of started to gear towards maybe more of a social justice type conversation. And then it led into abortion. And everybody involved in the conversation they were all on the same page. They were all against abortion. They did not agree with abortion. They did not believe in abortion. But yet, as the conversation went on, there was a few people in the conversation that they went towards this. We don't like abortion so much that we believe that we need to protest abortion, march at abortions. And I'm not talking the protests that you see where people will go and pray, where people will go and seek out the love of people. What I mean is the protests where they hold signs up and say, hey, something is wrong with you, and a protest that comes from a place of saying, I need you to know where I stand. Okay, I stand against you. And so as that conversation was going on, the other people in the conversation, they kind of winced just a little bit, kind of like, I don't know about that. What if you're to take all that time that you were putting into doing this protest march and rallies and whatnot, and what if you went and showed them some love? Serve them. Instead of taking that time to let them know you stand against them, what if you stand in for the person, that single mother who didn't have an abortion but yet doesn't know how to do this on her own? And so that's kind of how the conversation was going. And hear me out. This is not a message that is against protests. This is not a message that's against people that want to go and march and go to rallies. That's not what this is about. But I may step on some toes this morning. It is easier, or would you think it is easier to be someone that stands against something rather than someone who stands with someone? What do you think about that for just a moment? Is it easier to be the person who stands against something, or is it easier to be the person who stands with someone? There were two groups of people in this conversation. As I said, they were both Christians. Everybody there involved professed Christ, and yet the group the few that were saying, yeah, we want to go and we want to be about and protest. Just clarification, I know everybody in the conversation. I knew all of them. And I can speak from my heart that I love each and every one of them, but the few that were kind of in the motive process, they are on the outside. And clarification, there's nobody in this room or anybody at this church, okay? So before you start thinking, I wonder who he's talking about. Nobody here. So they're on the kind of on the outside of serving in the church. They don't want to get involved in the messiness of people's lives. They might do a little bit here and there, but they're not going to get involved in the messiness of people's life and serving people in general. And the others that were saying, well, why don't we kind of stand in the gap for these people? I know personally that they are each week involved in the messiness of people's lives. That when they serve, they get to know the people they're serving. They get to know their lives and what's going on with them. And so after hearing this conversation, it got me to thinking, how do we view people? Okay? How do we view people? Do we see them based on their religion? I look at somebody and I see a Muslim or a Buddhist or Hindu or even atheist. Do we see them by their race, their nationality, the color of their skin? Or do we see them by their political stance, whether they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, or whatever other parties we have created in the last 8 years in the political world? Do we look at people and we see them based on some of their choices and decisions in life? Do we look at people and say, I see you as someone by your sexual orientation, or by you're an addict, or you fill in the blank? Do we look at people and instead of seeing a person, we see an issue? Instead of seeing a child of God, we see somebody who has all sorts of issues and are messy, and so we keep them at arm's length. When we stand against someone based on their issues, we are telling them that this world and this life is black and white. That if you, based on your choices and your decisions, if you don't do this or you don't do that, if you don't live this cookie cutter way of black and white, then I'm going to keep you at arm's length, and we're just too different from each other. And instead of saying, I want to get involved in the messiness of life and get to know you, because when you get to know people, guys, let me tell you, I am speaking from experience. I have lived my life over the last 15 years. I have been that black and white type of person where I will look at somebody and say, you don't fit the mold that I believe should be involved in a church, and so I'm just going to keep you at a distance. Many of you have heard my story and the testimony that I have shared here in this church, how if it wasn't for a nosy nurse in an abortion clinic that told my mom, you don't need to do this, I wouldn't be up here. Somebody willing to get involved in the messiness of life. So I'm not up here saying I don't understand or I haven't been there before. But when you get involved in the messiness of people's life, things they aren't so black and white. We don't know what drives somebody to do what they do or make the decisions that they make. When we get involved in people's lives, we no longer see them as an issue, or we no longer see their issues, but we see them as a son or a daughter, a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, an aunt, an uncle, cousin, a grandparent. We see them as somebody in life. And the Bible shows us throughout how to deal with the issues of people. Okay? The Bible gives us these descriptions of how we can deal with issues, as we like to say. Jesus dealt with many people with issues. Mark, I'm going to switch to this yellow mic because I just do not. I figured I would do this. This headset just is bugging me. Turn that off. Check 1, 2. There we go. That will be better. It's just bugging the mess out of me. So Jesus dealt with people with issues. All right? Jesus came across people with issues all the time. We find in John chapter 4, Jesus is on his way to Galilee. He's leaving Judea and he is going down to Galilee. And In order to get there, the most direct path is to go through Samaria. Now, if you were a good Jew, as Jesus was, you did not go through Samaria. If you were to go through Samaria was a big cultural no-no, right? Because the Jews did not like the Samaritans. They despised them. And so they would actually take the long way around, make a longer trip, just so they would even step foot in Samaria. And so Jesus breaks that culture. He breaks those barriers, and he says, no, I'm going to go straight through Samaria. And so he's on his way through Samaria, and he gets to a place where he's going to stop and rest. And he comes upon a well. And the disciples, they go into the city to get some food. And so it's just Jesus, and then there's this woman at the well. Many of you have heard the story of the woman at the well. The first thing right out the gate is that it is Jesus alone with the woman. There's the first issue already that society of those days would say, why would Jesus even be by himself with a woman? Let alone that it was a Samaritan woman, someone the Jews did not interact with. And it was through that conversation that Jesus revealed to her that I know about your life. I know that you have had 5 husbands, and the man that you currently live with is not your husband. I know the messiness of your life. I know the issues that you face. I know that you are an adulterer. So here's Jesus with a woman who was a Samaritan, who was an adulterer. And the disciples return, and the thought is what are you doing? Don't you know that this could ruin your ministry? Could ruin all that we're doing. And Jesus does not look at her and see somebody with issues. He looks at her and sees someone who needs love. Above all, love. Then in Mark chapter 2, we see Jesus calling Levi to come and follow him. Levi was a tax collector. And in those days, you could not, in the Bible, you do not read tax collector without it being followed by sinner, right? Almost every single time you see tax collector, the word sinner follows it. And so Jesus comes to Levi and says, hey, come with me. Let's go to your house and let's eat. Let's partake in a meal. And so Levi does. He gets up and he goes with Jesus. And they go to Levi's house. And when they get there, there's other tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus goes in and has a meal with them. And the Pharisees, they begin to question Jesus as to why he would interact with these kind of people. Jesus, why would you be seen with somebody like this? Why would you be seen with someone who has these kind of issues? And Jesus responds that it is not the healthy who needs a doctor, but the sick. He said, I did not come to call the righteous, but to call the sinners. Again, he does not look and see somebody for the issues that they had. He did not look and see the sinners and tax collectors for somebody who should be abandoned and neglected, but yet he saw them as people who needed love. He saw them as children of God. And then in Luke chapter 7, we see Jesus once again encountering a sinner. And we don't get the name, as the woman in the well, we don't get a name. And in this situation, in Luke 7, it does not give a name. But at this time, it is a Pharisee named Simon who invites Jesus to his house for a meal. And Jesus goes, and once he gets there, it says a sinful woman heard that Jesus was there at Simon's house. And so the sinful woman comes to where Jesus is and stands behind Jesus at his feet, and she begins to weep. And as she weeps, she wipes his feet with her hair. And she had an alabaster jar full of perfume. And she kissed his feet and poured perfume on them. Simon said, if he was truly a prophet. Now I find it interesting, Simon's there, Jesus is there with him, and Simon doesn't really acknowledge Jesus standing there at this moment. It's not very clear who he's talking to, but it says that if he was truly a prophet, then he would know who was touching him. He would not allow her to touch him because she is a sinner. This idea that she has to be kept at arm's length. And I'm going to read verses 40 through 47, because what happens next is so amazing. It says, Jesus answered Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, I'm going to stop right there for just a moment. When I was reading through this passage, it gave me chills, the image that was given right there. Here is Simon, a Pharisee, a keeper of the law, this supposed to be man of God, and he is talking about this woman as if she doesn't exist, as if she's not in the room. It says, Jesus, why would he allow her to touch him and won't even acknowledge her? And then here's Jesus' reply. He looks to the woman to speak to Simon. It was just this image to me of saying, you are worth more. I am going to look at you, acknowledge you, and see you for something more than an issue or the prostitute that you are. And so he looks at her and he says, Simon, do you see this woman? He asked me, he says, do you see her? She's right here. I came into your house and you did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. This idea that her great love, she came into this room, she never once, it does not give us a recording that she comes to Jesus and says, I need you to forgive me for my sins. It says her great love. The great love that she showed was the forgiveness that she had received from Christ. We see these 3 stories and we see Jesus encounter people who were labeled by their community based on their issues, based on their sin, based on their choices. We have adulterers and fornicators, greed and theft. But instead of viewing these people by their issues or by their sin, Jesus chose to love. The Pharisees ridiculed Jesus for his interactions with these people. Jesus was questioned for his interactions with these people. But Jesus chose to love the lives that these people, instead of looking at them as issues. And Paul gives us a clear picture of what this kind of love is in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. He says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, it always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. There's this picture, this is the picture that we get when Jesus encounters these people, this idea of a love that's not distant. It's a love that's not, all right, you stay over there, I love you, but you stay on the other side of the tracks. You stay on the other side of the road because we're just too different. So, yeah, I love you, but just let's keep to our own track. It's this idea of this intimate love, this love that is there to protect, a love that is there that's not self-seeking. I'm not loving you to see what I can get out of it, but I'm loving you because that's what God has called me to do, and I'm loving you because you need love. Above all, love. And God demonstrates this in the crowning verse of Christianity. Right, John 3:16. John 3:16, it starts as it says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whosoever. Let's pause there for a second. That word whosoever. we oftentimes kind of skip over that word, or we oftentimes might just miss the meaning of this word and this idea that whosoever. It doesn't say, God so loved the world that if you live a perfect life, then you're good. It doesn't say that God so loved the world, and as long as you're a good Christian, you'll get everlasting life. It says, for God so loved the world, He gave His only Son, that whosoever believes will have everlasting life. This is the picture of a God who is not distant, a God who is close. And in John 13:34, it says that we are to love one another as Christ has loved us. And if we are to love one another as Christ loves us, then we are to love the whosoevers in the world around us. There are two types of people. I heard a pastor say many years ago that there are two types of people in the world. There are those that are Christians, and there are those that God is pursuing to be Christians. And if we're to love the way God loves, then we are to love those that God is pursuing to be Christians, because they are the whosoevers. Who are the whosoevers in your life that have been neglected, rejected, and left out? Who are the people that we look at and we see? And it may not be that you can give a name. It's not maybe that you can't identify a single person, but it may be that you can identify one of those labels that we used earlier. I'm Republican or Democrat. They stand on the other side of the line. We really can't get along too well. They're a different race. They're a different religion. I can't associate with that. I've got to make my stance. I got to put my sign in the ground and let everybody know I stand with Jesus and I stand against this. Yet Jesus is saying, I stand with them and I help them up and I love them. Who are the whosoevers in your life? Who is it that you see and identify by their issues? Our scripture this morning is from 1 Peter chapter 4. I want to take a moment as we read this, and in the beginning of this passage, it's going to give us this list. It's going to give this idea of a life that we should not live. Okay? It's going to break down. It's going to give us things that we shouldn't do or ways not to live. But then as we get to the end of this passage, it's going to wrap us back around to love. It says, therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude. Because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. For you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans chose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. They are surprised that you do not join them in their reckless, wild living, and they heap abuse on you. But they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was preached, even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to human standards in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the spirit. The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and of sober mind, so that you may pray. Above all, love. There it is. Above all, love. Love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. We get a very clear picture in the beginning there in the first few verses. We get a very clear picture of how we are not to live a life, right? It gives you this list of things. You should not be doing this. In Galatians chapter 5, we get a very similar list. It's called living by the flesh and not by the Spirit. And so God's saying, don't do this. And Jesus, in 1 Peter, he's saying you should not live this way. That's the way you used to live. And then we get to, but love, above all, love. You see, we get a picture of the woman at the well who was an adulterer. We get a picture of Levi, the tax collector, who was in idolatry of money. We get a picture of the sinful woman who was a fornicator and a prostitute. But Jesus said, these are the whosoevers in my life. And as Christians, we struggle with that, right? As Christians, we struggle with the idea that someone who lives a life like this, that someone who thinks like this, or someone who acts like this could be a whosoever. And we tend to forget that we were once that person who needed God, because we are the whosoevers. We are the whosoevers that have been broken and lost and need love. I've experienced both people mentioned in 1 Peter. I've experienced the church member who comes into church with great ideas and enthusiasm and ready to serve, ready to dive in and do stuff within the church. And in doing so, they just jump around from church to church, leaving a mess everywhere they go, causing people to leave ministry and leave the volunteer positions, because when they came in to serve, it was not serving out of love. It was because they checked off a list of things that they did right. They lived, they weren't in debauchery. They weren't in this lifestyle of sin, but yet they weren't serving out of a place of love. It was out of a place of, what can I get from serving? And they left a mess everywhere they were. And then there was my brother, who by all accounts fits the lifestyle of sin listed in 1 Peter. An addict, living with his girlfriend. The ideal picture of what someone like me 10 years ago looked at and said, you're not worthy of my time, because you've got too many issues. And I can't express to you enough, I can't share all the stories of people that I had that would come up to me at his funeral and say, you have no clue how your brother saved my life. Whether it was physically, spiritually, the amount of people who are involved in church. And you sit here and say, are you glorifying and saying everything he did was okay? Right? No, I'm not here to glorify the actions and the choices that he made, but what I'm here to say is that he lived a life of love, and everybody that came across him and everybody that came up to me said, your brother loved, and he loved well. And in 1 Peter, it says, above all, love deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. And if you could read his letters, if you could read his journal, the months leading up to his death, at how many times he cried out and said, God, I don't want this life. I can't live this life. Please take away this addiction. Do we look at people and see issues? Or do we see somebody's brother or sister or mother or father? Above all, love. Don't love from a distance. Don't love at arm's length. It went a little bit deeper and said love deeply. You can't do that from a distance. You can't. as Blake and Kirsten come back to close us in worship, I want to close this message in the very same way that I opened. This message is simple, but it's a hard application. The message is simple, but it's a hard application. It's hard to look at somebody that is so maybe different from who you are or what you're used to. There's like, how can I love them the same way that I love somebody that's just like me? John 15:12, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Simple. Who's the whosoevers in your life? Who is the two types of people, the Christian and the person that God is pursuing to be a Christian? How well do we love them? This morning as we close, I told you at the beginning, if April was in here, she would be shaking her head. I used to be the most black and white person in this room. But I'm telling you, over the last 14 years of serving in ministries of various different types and places, and getting involved in the messiness of people's lives. You see our students on Wednesday nights. Talk about messy. You see them running down the hallway and you hear me yell 5 times, stop running. Or you may hear a word fly or something said that probably shouldn't be said. I can tell you at least half of these kids either have one parent or no parent. Half these kids, a parent's either on drugs or in jail. Their life is messy. I've had them tell me, Pastor Mike, what's wrong with me saying this? There's nothing wrong with it. My mom says it every day. I don't understand. Why is it wrong? All right, let's talk about it. Above all, just love. Love these people who have issues. Maybe you know somebody this morning that you've loved from afar because they had issues. Or maybe you know this morning you're wrestling because, you classified people and God's saying, I just want to break down that barrier. I don't want you to classify people by anything other than being a child of God who I have called you to love. This morning, I just ask that we could give that up to God and just love as He has loved us. Dearly Father, I thank you for your love. That it was nothing that I had to do. I didn't have to live a certain way. I didn't have to make the right choices. I didn't have to walk the straight line in order for you to love me. That when God said that He so loved the world, that whosoever, that I could change that name that to Micah. That Micah, if you just believe in me. That's how personal of a love that God is showing to us. God, may we take that love that we did not earn and that we did not deserve. And may we show that to others. We thank you for all that you do. It's in your name we pray.